You've reached the end of this module, which explored the concepts of data and state in React. It's now time to recap the key knowledge and skills you've gained. Module 2 gave you an overview of the concept and practical use of state and stage management. In the process, you gained knowledge on how to handle events, and you learned how to dynamically change content on a web page. The first lesson was about dynamic events and how to handle them in React Native. You now know that every time you click or tap a button or scroll down a page, it produces events in the browser. And events are the process by which JavaScript interacts with HTML. You learned how to identify types of events and how to handle them using components. React can work with most of the same events found in HTML, but React handles them differently. This means that you may encounter unfamiliar errors when you run your event-driven React code. Thus, you learned about common errors associated with events and how you can deal with them. You also learned about the syntax differences for using event handlers in HTML and React, so that you can write event handling code using different types of syntax. Another important topic you covered are the different ways to embed expressions in event handlers in React. These methods include using an inline anonymous ES5 function, using an inline anonymous ES6 function, using a separate function declaration, and using a separate function expression. Then you moved on to learning how all the event handling concepts work together with state, styling, and the use of ternary expressions. To test your skills at dealing with dynamic events, you completed an ungraded lab where you practiced event handling by building a simple number guessing game. And that was the end of lesson 1. The second lesson was about data and events. In this part of the module, you learned about the React data flow hierarchy, like how data flows from a parent to a child component. In React, data flow is a one-way street. It starts at the root and can flow to multiple levels of nesting, from the root component to the subcomponent, and then the sub-subcomponent, and further down the hierarchy. This type of data flow ensures that the data is moving from top to bottom through the component hierarchy. It also ensures that changes are transmitted through the system. Next, you learned about state and how it relates to component behavior. All data in React can be divided into props data and state data. Props data is data outside the components that it receives and works with, but cannot mutate. State data is data inside the component that it controls and can mutate. Keeping track of state across components can be difficult, and this is where React hooks come in. Hooks are functions. One key benefit of hooks is that they solve the problem of unnecessary code reuse across components. For example, you can use the useState hook to track any type of data. It could be strings, numbers, arrays, booleans, and objects. The biggest benefit of hooks is the readability and simplicity that they provide to the code. You also learned about some common approaches for state management. For example, how Context API can be used to manage state more efficiently across multiple levels of components. You learned how to perform basic state management using the useContext and userReducer hooks found in Context API. After this, you were introduced to stateful and stateless components, and you learned how to choose the best type to suit a given need. For example, a stateful component holds state as internal data, and its state changes based on the way that the app is built, often as a result of user actions. A stateless component, however, doesn't store state, and any changes must be inherited through props. You learned some rules to follow to decide if a component should be stateless or stateful. These are: use stateless components when your component doesn't need to maintain its own state in order to work. Use stateful components when your component does need to maintain its own state in order to work. And finally, you completed an ungraded lab that tested your ability to manage state in React. After completing this module, you are now able to identify some common errors associated with events and use the syntax required to handle them. Use an event to dynamically change content on a web page. Explain the hierarchical flow of data in React. Recognize how data flows in both stateful and stateless components. Explain the concept and nature of state and state change, and use common methods to manage state in React. In the upcoming module, you'll learn about working with links and routing, as well as using assets in React. This should finalize your preparations for coding your own portfolio project in React. Excellent! You've made great progress in your journey toward becoming a React developer.